It was a creed written into the founding documents that declared the destiny of a nation. Yes, we can. It was whispered by slaves and abolitionists as they blazed the trail toward freedom. Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
It was sung
by immigrants as they struck out the distant shores, pioneers who pushed westward against the unforgiving wilderness. Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
It was the call of workers organized, women who reached for the ballots, a president who chose the moon as our new frontier, and a king who took us to the mountains.
From WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network, the case of Eric Garner was a man killed in New York by a police officer, literally choked to death. That happened 5 years ago. We are on the 17th of July, 2019, Boston Red, from the Jared Pippin broadcast booth. Eric Garner died 5 years ago. His dying words were, "I can't breathe," became a rallying cry. And the Attorney General appointed by DJ Trump has dropped the case officially. This is Dateline New York Times on the 16th by Katie Bena. A contentious year-long debate inside the Justice Department over whether to bring federal charges against an officer in the death of Eric Garner ended Tuesday after the Attorney General Barr ordered the case to be dropped. The U.S. Attorney in Brooklyn, Richard Donahue, announced the decision one day after the 5th anniversary of Eric Garner's death at the hands of police officers on Staten Island. Now, Staten Island is a backdrop for reaction in the city of New York. Many police officers live there. The case sharply divided federal officials, prompted national protests over excessive force by police. Bystanders filmed the arrests on their mobile phones, recording Mr. Garner as he gasped, "I can't breathe," and his death was one of several fatal encounters between African American and the police that catalyzed the national movement known as Black Lives Matter. Now, on the other side of that coin, you have people saying, well, all lives matter. Well, we don't dispute that humanity in the value of lives, in the humanity. But that particular slogan was made up as a racial backdrop, and it has been exploited by reactionary politicians dating back to George Corley-Wallace, if we have to bring him in, Tricky Dick Nixon, and various Republicans. So nothing is new here, period. But what has occurred, we in the progressive community, African Americans as a whole, now understand that the case of these police officers murdering young African Americans is a national cause célèbre. It is not confined to Brooklyn. It's not confined to Missouri and the St. Louis area. It's not confined to Cleveland. It's not confined to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and many points in between. All of these cases have one scenario. The police are involved, and the reason they're involved is a matter of their training. We'll get to the police officer out in Tulsa, Oklahoma in a minute here that is now teaching other police officers. The problem is the training, and that has to be properly agitated, demanded, and it is something that moves on. Now, the reactionary forces are at work. There's no doubt about that. They showed their ugly head in the Mohammed Noor case out in Minnesota, where they were asking that he receive house arrest and not be incarcerated. in actuality for the brutal murder of Christine Ruchek Denard. He deserved life in prison without parole. But what happened to Noah there is that he got basically 12 years, a combination of in-prison time and supervised time that's become much more popular these days, where he'll be wearing the proverbial bracelet. His attorneys have appealed the case based upon trial errors. That is their job, but the judge erred. The judge did not give him his full Sixth Amendment rights there to confront witnesses, etc. And that is before the appeals court in Minnesota. At the same time, Noah has been removed from Minnesota. He's now in North Dakota in a facility outside of Bismarck, roughly over 500 kilometers from the base there in Minneapolis. And let's move on with our presentation here. Still, Staten Island grand jury declined to indict Pantaleo. His name was Daniel Pantaleo, who was captured on video wrapping his arms around Mr. Garner's neck. The civil rights investigation dragged on for 5 years amidst internal disputes in the Justice Department under both President Barack Obama and DJ Trump. At the end, Barr made the call not to seek a civil rights indictment against Pantaleo just before the deadline for filing such charges expired. His intervention settled a disagreement between prosecutors in the civil division, which had pushed for an indictment, and the Brooklyn prosecutors, who never believed the department could win such a case. On Tuesday morning, Donahue called Garner's death a tragedy, but said that the evidence did not support charging Pantaleo with a federal civil rights violation. He went over the arrest step by step, maintained the government could not prove that Officer Pantaleo willfully used excessive force to violate Mr. Garner's civil rights. The Garner family and its supporters immediately condemned Barr, saying the Justice Department had failed him. His mother, Gwen Carr, and we go out to her, shifted the pressure to the mayor, Bill de Blasio, who is trying to run for president, calling upon the city to fire this hyena Pantaleo, and vowed to fight to hold officials involved in the arrest accountable. We're not going away, so you can forget that, Ms. Carr said. New York needs to come out and flood this city tomorrow. Dr. Al Sharpton, the national leader, was standing with her, adding, 5 years ago, Eric Garner was choked to death. Today, the federal government choked Lady Justice, and that's why we are outraged. At a later rally on the steps of the City Hall, a parade of family members, community leaders, local politicians, civil rights lawyers vented their fury at Barr. Well, there's been fury towards Barr on the matter of the Mueller report that is out there. So Barr is nothing more than an errand boy. But we have to understand who he is an errand boy to. He's an errand boy for the Republican Party. This goes beyond the matter of DJ Trump. Stuart London, a lawyer for Pantaleo, said that his client was gratified. No doubt he was. And he knew, and as LBJ would say, anyone who's ever been to a goat roping contest knew that the Department of Justice, under this reactionary regime, would have not indicted the Officer Pantaleo there, and they would not have indicted him even under President Barack Obama. Lynch, the president of the Police Fraternal Association, said the officer had been unfairly singled out for the blame and was carrying out a superior's orders. Well, the superior needs to be brought to bear scapegoating a good and honorable officer who was doing his job in the manner he was taught, and that's the whole problem right there. Will not heal the wounds of this case's course for the entire city. That is from the president of the Police Fraternal Association. From the start, the Pantaleo investigation sharply divided the Justice Department. The AG at the time, Eric Holder Jr., said that the evidence strongly suggests the federal government should bring charges against Pantaleo, even though it was notoriously hard to prosecute police officers for death in custody. The last time a federal grand jury brought a death force case against a New York officer was in 1998, when an officer named Francis X. Levodi stood trial on and was evidently convicted of civil rights charges in choking a death of a man in the Bronx by the name of Anthony Bess. But prosecutors in the New York Attorney's Office U.S. Attorney's Office in Brooklyn, led by Laura Lynch, did not believe they could win in court and balked at bringing the charge. Now, Laura Lynch eventually became the successor to Holder. Once Lynch succeeded Holder, that was in April of 2015. Vita Gupta, the head of the Civil Rights Division, and her lawyers convinced Lynch that the officer had very likely violated Mr. Garner's civil rights. Lynch allowed the Civil Division to take a leading role in the case, and following September, the department replaced the FBI's prosecutors who had worked the case with a new team from outside of New York. The sides disagreed over whether a widely published video of Garner arrest proved that the officer had acted wrongfully, and the prosecutors in Washington accused their colleagues in Brooklyn of mishandling the case. The case stalled again after D.J. Trump won the presidential election and appointed the Confederate Beauregard Sessions as the Attorney General. The Civil Rights Division prosecutors recommended to the Deputy Attorney General at the time, Ron Rothstein, that charges be brought. But they declined to move further along as the Russian investigation engulfed the department. Sessions was fired and the case languished until Barr took it up. To the bitter end, prosecutors on both sides of the debate lobbied Barr in a series of briefs, and Barr reviewed the video multiple times. We doubt it. But it remained unclear. Prosecutors interviewed Pantaleo, which had been would have helped establish his state of mind and intent. Very important in these kinds of cases, state of mind and intent, when he put Mr. Garner in the chokehold. When asked whether prosecutors had interviewed the officer, the Justice Department would only say that the department had access to statements relevant to that analysis. Barr and the insider with prosecutors in New York, an easy thing to do. It was all the way up to the Commissioner, James P. O'Neill, the final arbitrator of police discipline, decide whether to fire Pantaleo or punish him in other ways. However, the Commissioner would not make a formal decision until a police administrative judge who oversees disciplinary trials that ended in June rendered her verdict. A spokesperson of the department said the officer, 34-year-old, has been at the desk without a shield or a gun since the death. The status has allowed him to accrue pay and pension benefits. Kristen Gillibrand, she is a senator from New York, running for president, called the decision an outrage and said the department must make their departmental findings fully transparent to the public and take action to ensure this officer is no longer on the force. Eric Garner was 43 years old, died on the Staten Island sidewalk. That was on the 17th of July, 5 years ago, 2014. After, of course, the arm being wrapped around, the officer ordered to arrest him for selling untaxed cigarettes. He had resisted. A medical examiner testified at a disciplinary hearing at the pressure on his neck and chest set in motion a fatal asthma attack. Federal prosecutors did a rigorous analysis of the events, but in the end they did not believe they had enough evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the officer committed a crime. That was according to a senior Justice Department official, speaking, of course, on condition of anonymity. To approve a criminal conduct, the official said the government had to convince a jury that in the middle of a dynamic arrest, Officer Pantaleo made a clear decision to apply a chokehold, which the department has banned more than 2 decades ago. It was a brutal. It was a burden that the prosecutors did not believe they could meet. None of the New York officers involved in the death have been charged with a crime or disciplined by the department. The fact has enraged the Garner family and various other people in the city of New York. The grand jury declined to bring charges against Pantaleo in December of 2014 after he testified on his own defense that he did not put Mr. Garner into a chokehold when he feared he would be pushed through a storefront window during the struggle. He lied. The department said that it had weighted 4 elements in deciding whether to charge the officer, involving whether he used a reasonable force or whether he willfully violated the law, and whether he acted in his official capacity as a law enforcement professional. Well, that's debatable right there. And whether the other person was injured. Donahue said the prosecutor did not believe they could prove he had intentionally used unreasonable force. Even if they could prove the officer used force that was objectively unreasonable, the government would still have to show the officer did it willfully, a very high level. The Brooklyn prosecutor studied a video of the encounter, concluded that Pantaleo did not intentionally intend to apply a chokehold, but he evidently did it for several seconds after the 2 men clashed on the ground. Donahue said the police officer Pantaleo had released from the chokehold, Mr. Garner, the chokehold, when he said he can't breathe. Neither Pantaleo nor the other officers subduing him applied a chokehold at that point. In the end, he said the video does not establish beyond a reasonable doubt that Pantaleo acted willfully. Well, he did act willfully. This Pantaleo is a little spark plug type character with very large biceps on him. And there's a smiling Eric Garner there. But this case itself is legendary. It is now 5 years old, and it reaches a cookie cutter pattern. And Eric Attorney General Holder has talked about this, of changing the threshold in the law to modernize it to 2019-2020 standards. We're seeing more and more of these encounters, more and more murders out there. And let me go to more here. I think we'll switch to the this is a roundup here. How does the Garner, this is again from the New York Times, decision compare with other cases? And they have pictures like a rogues gallery of various people, including Honor, Betty Jo Selby, Jason Van Dyke, who's been convicted, and Darren Wilson. Well, Darren Wilson was in Ferguson after the fatal chokehold of Garner by a New York police officer. A familiar pattern unfolds. Expression of outrage is promised to investigate a long wait for resolution on Tuesday, just before the 5th anniversary, which is today, would come. Federal prosecutors not seek a civil charges against Pantaleo. Mr. Garner's death was amongst several involving police officers in recent years. It led to protests and called for police officers to face criminal charges. Here's what happened to the officers in some of the cases, and this is by Mitch Smith on the 16th. Let me get that down here. The vast majority of officers who kill civilians are never charged. Protesters marched for months in 2014 when Derek Wilson in Ferguson, Missouri, shot and killed Mr. Michael Brown. He was an unarmed teenager. Wilson resigned. The grand jury declined to indict him. Federal prosecutors declined to file civil rights charges. And then in 2014, Tim Lumen, a rookie patrolman in Cleveland, shot and killed Tamara Rice, an African-American 12 years old, within seconds of arriving outside a recreation center where Tamara was carrying a replica gun. Lohman, who is a European, was not criminally charged but was fired from the Cleveland Police Department. Lohman accepted another policing job in rural Ohio, but resigned on pressure from activists. He appealed his firing from the Cleveland Police Department. Protesters in Minneapolis, Minnesota, occupied an area outside a police station for days in 2015 after Jamal Clark, another African American, was shot during a struggle with Mark Regenberg and Dusty Swartz. Both officers, who are Europeans, returned to work after the county prosecutor and the police chief cleared them of wrongdoing. Officer Ringerberg was amongst the first officers on the scene after another Minneapolis officer shot and killed an unarmed woman. Out in Tulsa, Oklahoma, now they did it differently there. They filed swift charges against an officer named Betty Jo Selby with manslaughter after she shot and killed Terrence Crutcher. We covered that event. An unarmed African American. That was in 2016. The jury acquitted her. Officer Selby, who was a European, returned to work. She later resigned from the Tulsa Police Department after being assigned to a desk job, in other words, not being allowed on the street. Twice prosecutors tried to convince jurors that Terry Tensing, a University of Cincinnati police officer, was guilty of murder in the death of Samuel DuBose, an unarmed African-American driver. Twice jurors deadlocked and failed to reach a verdict. Prosecutors declined to do a third trial. Tensing, who had been fired shortly after the shooting, was later reported to have reached a settlement with the university that include legal fees and $250,000 walking around money. In Baltimore, Maryland, in 2015, when Freddie Gray, an African American, was killed after suffering a spinal injury in a police van. The local prosecutor there, a heroic prosecutor, filed charges against 6 officers there, but none of them were convicted. Federal prosecutors declined. In later years, 3 police officers have been convicted. Roy D. Oliver II, police officer in Bauch, Texas, shot and killed Jordan Edwards with a high-powered rifle as Jordan, who was an African-American, and 15 other teenagers drove away from a house party in 2017. Oliver was convicted of murder last summer and sentenced to 15 years in Huntsville. And the Jordan family called it too lenient. And then comes this other hyena, Muhammad Noor, claiming he feared from his life from Justine Ruchek Daman, a European woman wearing pajamas and holding a cell phone, approached the squad car. That was in the summer of 2017. He shot and killed her. Juries did not accept his verdict. He was sentenced to 12.5 years. We talked about that earlier. In 2014, showing this another hyena, Jason Van Dyke. He was a Chicago police officer, shooting Laquan McDonald 16 times. He was an African-American police officer who had been holding a knife, touched off of political upheaval in the city of Chicago led to an overhaul of the police department and the election of a new mayor. Lori Lightfoot, juries found Van Dyke guilty of murder last year, the first such conviction of an on-duty police copper in decades in Chicago, and he was sentenced to 7 years in prison. The Kwanzaa family and the Illinois Attorney General called it an inadequate sentence. But the takeaway here is these characters are beginning to get some time. Again, this is the New York Times here. European officer is acquitted. This was the one out in Tulsa, Oklahoma. This is this Betty Jo Selby in the death of Terrence Crutcher. A jury here of 8 women and 4 men, including at least 4 African Americans, deliberated for 5 hours and finding she was not guilty of manslaughter. Shauna said she was the attorney for the officer, said that her client was overwhelmed. She is elated, no doubt. And the father, Joseph Crutcher, said after the verdict, I have 4 grandchildren that are at my home that have lost their daddy, and I say I would accept whatever the verdict was, and I'm going to do that, but let it be known, I believe in my heart that Selby got away with murder. Well, she did get away with murder. Police cam captured the scene. That was on the 16th of September 2016 when the officer, 43, fired a single bullet into Crutcher. He was 40 years old. As he stood next to his SUV in a tree-lined street, the case did not lead to a level of anger and scrutiny that some did. There was more or less an agreement in the city of Tulsa that the city would charge this person, who she'd been on unpaid leave from the department since she was charged, took the potential risky step of testifying herself and lying. Both sides made closing arguments before a crowd so large it spilled out of the courtroom into the halls. Prosecutors argued that Selby fired several seconds before the gesture the defense cited as a basis for her fear. She didn't have any fear. District attorneys always routinely calls officers and witnesses in other cases, yet he had the audacity to come in here and tell you that the law enforcement officer, after he tells you how brave they are, had a difficult job to do, would come in here and lie to protect Selby. These were officers who testified for defense. It's routine that they lie. Now, in the case of Muhammad Noor, there was a different standard there. Police officers had a meeting literally when they start chamber operations in the basement of the government center and swore to a blue wall of silence. And the district attorney would have none of that. He convened a grand jury, forced them to testify on the contempt of court charges, and the lies just fell out. That is a pattern for what happens here. And the article goes on to talk about what happened to Tamir Rice in Cleveland, Freddie Gray in Baltimore, Samuel Du Bois in Cleveland, and Walter Scott. Now, this is in North Carolina. The officers were charged, but their trials ended in hung juries. The officer who shot Scott later pled guilty to unrelated charges. Shortly before he died, Crutcher stopped the SUV in the middle of a North Tulsa street, got out, behaving erratically and prompting 911 call for motorists. That's how that thing went down. She claimed she was fearing for her life, but Crutcher was just standing by his SUV. He was not approaching her. Crutcher's twin sister, Tiffany Crutcher, described the testimony as nauseating. We felt that Terrence, one who can't speak for himself, was on trial, and she was a victim. That's what, as Crutcher said, who either she has a PhD or she is an attorney. Anyway, we now go to the Washington Post. As we wind this down, she fatally shot an unarmed African American. Now she's teaching other police officers how to survive such incidents. And this is by Isaac Stanley Becker on the 28th of August 2018. She calls it the Ferguson Effect. This is a right-wing stance that 2 years after she fatally shot an unarmed African American in Tulsa, now a police officer in a joint county, is teaching a course on how to survive such events, legally, emotionally, and physically. The course, she explains, it is to an affiliate, ABC affiliate, to equip officers to withstand the effects named from the Missouri City, conversed by the shooting in 2014 of Mr. Brown, when a police officer is victimized by anti-police groups and tried in the court of public opinion. She was tried last year. This is Selby in a criminal count. She was acquitted of first-degree manslaughter in the shooting of Mr. Terrence Crutcher. But the jury questioned her judgment as a law enforcement officer. If a less lethal force, like a taser, was out there, a serious consideration must be given to whether she be allowed to return to practicing law enforcement, said the former jury in a letter. The presiding member asked the court to make a public placate placate the media's desire to interview members of the jury. The Tulsa Police Department pulled up in the streets, reassigned her for a desk job for the rest of her life. She finally resigned. I felt like my career was done. Well, it should have been done. Now a new debate is underway in the city of Tulsa, scarred by the 1921 Tulsa race riot, a massacre in which European mobs laid waste to a prosperous African-American neighborhood known as Little Wall Street, one of the most devastating episodes in the history of U.S. race relations. The debate asks what can be learned from police-involved shooting and who's entitled to do that teaching. Selby is poised to bring her state-approved training course, Surviving the Aftermath of a Critical Incident, to the city where her own critical incident unfolded. It was scheduled to appear at the Tulsa County Sheriff's Office's drawn condemnation from local activists, no doubt about that. Mark Lewis, the founder of a group, community organization, and a watchdog group, We the People of Oklahoma, said the class newly highlights the injustice of making a police officer out to be a victim, when this, we call this in political consulting, a flippable. Outside of the courthouse, condemned Selby's signs banned Betty. One more indication that Betty Selby has been rewarded for killing Terrence Crutcher. The children are still suffering, Lewis said in an interview. In a statement to an ABC affiliate, Selby defended her qualification to teach the course when she said it was not about the shooting, whom details she claimed not to be covering. I faced many challenges, but I was unprepared for such as threats to my life by activist groups to a loss of pay. She said, my class is to help others by sharing some of those skills I use to cope with the stress of a critical event. As law enforcement, we experience many critical incidents throughout our career. According to a state website, the training, which is certified by the Oklahoma Council on Law Enforcement Education and Training, will describe some of the changes dealing with the aftermath of an event. In the office involved, shooting participants will be exposed to the many physical, financial, emotional challenges result from the incident. The free course lasts 4 hours, including mental health hours. The month after she resigned from the Tulsa Police Department, she weaseled her way in as a reserve deputy in some place called Rogers County, that is northeast of Tulsa. She maintained a limited role for several months to make room for the plan of speaking engagement, according to an Oklahoma newspaper, assumed the full-time patrol duties at the end of last year. Selby said her experience in Tulsa required her to be even more vigilant in her new assignment. An attorney for Selby, Scott Wood, told the Post Tuesday that the class fills a critical hole in officers' training. I imagine it does. Even if it doesn't happen to someone, every cop has a friend or workmate who's involved in skullduggery. My words, not hers. Wood, who was a Tulsa police officer in the 80s, said he had been representing officers for more than 20 years. Wood said his clients received a cascade of death threats after the shooting, but none of them have been carried out. Of the protests, her attorney said Selby knows there's a certain part of the population, now you imagine this, a certain part who she's talking about, followers of O.J. Simpson, but are not going to accept the verdict and not even going to take her as someone who's worthy of training other officers. No doubt about that. Police dash cams, helicopter videos showed Crutcher walking with his arms up towards his vehicle after reaching the driver's side window. One of the officers enlisted a stun gun while this Selby fired. That's why she was taken off the street. The shootings, which unfolded in the final months of a presidential election, addressed the incident during an event at an African church in Cleveland. The candidate, DJ Trump, said it appears that Crutcher did something you're supposed to do, and he looked like a real good guy. Well, that's interesting there. The young officer, I don't know what she was thinking. I don't know what she was thinking, DJ Trump said, repeat himself for emphasis. I'm very, very troubled by that. I'm very, very troubled by that, and we have to be very careful before a criminal trial. She defended herself in a 60-minute interview, said Crutcher was intoxicated PCP. TCP is in his system at the time. Well, he may have been in his system, but he still had his hands up. Lewis, whose organization helped spread the word about Selby's appearance at the county sheriff's office, allowed that the officers may still use observations based on her involvement, but said that, of course, is not appropriate. Public Information Office of the Sheriff's Department didn't respond, no doubt about that. They'd like to forget about her. African American Tulsans are nearly 2.5 times more likely to be unemployed than European residents. That's according to an Equity Indicators report in 2018 in the city of Tulsa. Meanwhile, African American juveniles are more than 3 times likely to be arrested than European ones. Lewis said the timing of the course, falling on the 65th anniversary of Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech, magnifies the offense to the community and to the world. Not only are you doing this in Tulsa, where the egregious violence occurred 2 years ago, but also on the 65th anniversary of Dr. King's speech. His speech was in 1963. Wait a minute. That's not right. It would be the 55th. That was in 1963. Anyway, that address delivered from the steps of Lincoln Memorial said there's a question posed to activists: when you will be satisfied. We will never be satisfied as long as at that time the Negro is a victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality, the Reverend answered. So this is concluding the case, evidently from the comments of DJ Trump, and we understand that even he at the time as a candidate saw that this was an egregious event, that this officer was loco, my words, not DJ Trump's, and it needed to be reviewed. Now, evidently, this jury out there in Tulsa, Oklahoma, would terrify the police department. We don't know why the 4 African Americans agreed with such a presentation when there was video from the police officer's camcorder, and also from a helicopter that was flying above. There was plenty of evidence there, and we saw Crutcher standing with his hands up at his SUV. He was not approaching this Selby character at all, and no police officer had out a stun gun. So why did she shoot? Only Biddy Joe Sylvie knows. But by taking on such a course as she has, justifying that and trying to paint the police officer as a victim, she's consciously playing into that space. And there are other apologists out there for police officers, no doubt about them, even some misguided African Americans. As a famous philosophy said, being a fool is not a matter of your race. That would like to support these police officers in a misguided attempt to establish what's called law and order, a fear for safety. Well, safety is one of those things obviously is not guaranteed. And in many cities it is something that erupts when violent acts occur on public streets, in homes, in workplaces. Those kind of things have occurred, as it did down in Virginia, where a number of people were killed in a state office facility. So this debunks this whole idea of safety. There is no such thing. With the number of guns out there, as what happened out in Las Vegas, any person that is so driven can amass over a number of months. And sometimes there was a woman literally drove out to Denver and she was able to obtain a gun just after literally getting off the airplane. There was no waiting period there, etc. And she was in business. She never executed. She was going to the Combine High School or wherever. She was tracked down, and before they could find her, she blew her head off. No judicial time wasted on her. But this is the atmosphere in which the United States of America operates on July the 17th, 2019. We definitely can do better, but anytime you have a society that is washed in firearms, you can throw the word "be safe" out the door. That is an illusion. Period. People are not safe. And on top of that, with the NRA and various other groups out there, and now there's bumper stocks, which automates the process. Silencers which used to be illegal, now called suppressors. And when you have these things out there, virtually anyone can get hold of a gun, or they can steal a gun. Whatever the situation is, they can get a gun, walk on any public type of thoroughfare, and when all else fails, as happened in Charlottesville, Virginia, of course we remember Heather Heyer, use an automobile to run people over, to kill and maim them. Again, the safety was not guaranteed. But that's the illusion, along with the victimization of police. Those are two illusionary things that people bring out there. The reason that they tell people to be safe is to basically tell them that the police have their back. The police don't have anything. They cannot stop random shootings, whether mass or not, because they don't know when they're going to occur. There are very many other things that can't stop these killings of unarmed civilians. Could be stopped and are less likely to happen now that we have some convictions. Some people are on ice, as they would say in the street. Old Nora is in North Dakota, in a jail there. They had the old white supremacist Craig, what's his name, and I believe in the same prison. But there are white supremacists there also, and they ship these people around. I think it was Van Dyke out of Chicago that was sent to some minimum federal facility. And of course the prisons of grapevine is what people don't know on the outside, people do know on the inside. and he was roughed up a bit there, some facial scars, etc. So we go on and on. We'll see you on Friday Jobber. And incidentally, we have a numbers man report. That is our macroeconomics report. We talked about the job numbers, where the jobs were. Now, that report came out actually on the 5th of July, but we did not have it out there. And also on the numbers from China, the 6.2 in their GDP. We dove down from the Bureau of Statistics and pointed out what they're actually doing. Very, very detailed in their economy, their PCIs, where they're above 50. And all of our materials can be found on iHeartRadio, on the Google Podcast, Stitcher, Spreaker, YouTube, Tumblr, something called Cashbox or whatever, and many, many more outlets. And the archives, the internet archives, they can be found. There's some of them. We're getting more of them up there. This is Boston Red from the Jared Pippin Memorial Broadcast Booth. Good day.